Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Recently, the House of Representatives passed the 2019 Finance Bill. This comes 1 week after the Senate approved the piece of legislation sent by the executive. The intent of the bill is to overhaul the country's tax provisions and raise more revenue for the government. The acts that will be affected by the new law include Value-Added Tax Act, Companies Income Tax Act, Personal Income Tax Act, Petroleum Profits Tax Act, Customs and Excise Tariff Act, Capital Gains Tax Act, and the Stamp Duties Act. The next step will be for a harmonized version of the clauses passed by both houses to be sent to President Muhammadu Buhari. Nigerians have so far been reacting to the Stamp Duty and the VAT Act in particular. Well, now this morning we have with us Emeka Onwuka, partner and head of private clients and family wealth at Andersen Tax LP, who will join us to discuss this subject and other related issues. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning,
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Linda.
It's good to have you here.
Thanks.
Well, let's start by asking you to help us unpack this finance bill. What is it about? What is special about it? And how is it different from current tax legislation?
I think it's interesting and a very welcome development. That shows the dynamism with which we're approaching the tax regime in this country. I would say that this didn't come as a surprise to more tax advisors, because some of the issues are covered by the new finance bill. In fact, you read that most of the different tax acts are affected, about seven in all. Some of these issues have been contested over the years, and where we've been discussing with the revenue to seek clarification on them. But this finance bill had actually provided clarification on these aspects of the act. And of course, the big one being the VAT in terms of the rate that had been moved up to 7.5. But if you look at particular acts, there are very interesting aspects. And I would say it's a win-win both for the taxpayers and also for the government. For the taxpayer, that the clarifications that have been provided by the Finance Act will improve compliance, will improve the ease with which business are being done in the country. On the side of the government as well, in some of the legislation, some of the changes as well, will increase the sources for government funding for the budget. When we talk about the details, then we'll go to that.
Okay. Now, many also argue that Nigeria has a tax compliance problem, or let's say a compliance problem, simply because of a lack of trust that we have in government officials and also just in public services as a whole. There's a serious dissatisfaction that seems to be coming from the public. So when we look at this, how is this bill really going to address this compliance problem?
Okay, like I said, it helps clarify some of the area that most taxpayers are, I would say, arguing with the revenue. Let's take, for instance, the tax rate. For the first time, the government are taking the small business out of the tax bracket. If you are earning, your revenue is less than 25 million naira, they don't expect to pay taxes today. That is a very welcome development in terms of having to pay 30%, which is a tax rate for corporate. Also, if you are revenue between 25 and 100 million naira, you only pay 20% instead of 30%. So that will encourage compliance. That will encourage people to come forward and file returns and increase visibility for government as to the business. Because the first time they come into the bracket and say, I don't have tax to pay, but I'm filing my returns and look at what my exposure is, and look at what my business is. And the government can then keep track of that. On the issue about compliance, it's a general issue with developing countries, okay? Because people believe that the resources that the government get from the taxpayers are not put back in terms of providing facilities for them. It's the same story for most developing economies, which is why indirect taxes have been more effective, which is looking about VAT, taxes on goods and services, rather than taxes on income and profit, in terms of sourcing for government for funding. Okay, but over time, we believe that as government become more transparent in terms of utilization of these sources, the taxpayers will be more comfortable to meet their payment. But we also have to bear in mind that, yes, taxation is a social contract between the taxpayers and the government, in which case I want to make the payment, you expect government also to provide public goods and services. However, taxation is also described as compulsory and unrequited payments to government. Unrequited to the extent that the services you get from government, it's not normally commensurate with the payment that you make because government holds the money and takes care of the general public. However, that won't be made. We expect that government transparency and government responsiveness to the needs of the people will encourage compliance from the taxpayers.
Well, the Minister of Finance, each time she addressed this finance bill, she talked about incentives, particularly for small and medium-scale enterprises. But, critics of the bill say that, look, what are the opportunities? They really cannot see those opportunities apart from the fact that the government just wants more revenue instead of looking for more creative ways of diversifying its revenue base. So what do you think about this? Do you think the cost of business would necessarily go up as a result of this review of the tax regime, particularly in some key sectors that may be affected?
Okay. Not necessarily. Like, I said it's a win-win for the taxpayers and also for government. And look at, on the taxpayer side, what are the benefits in terms of how it will affect their business and the way that they're currently operating. I talked about the small businesses in terms of taking them off payment of taxes. The big hit is also insurance companies, for instance. Over the years, the way the tax laws apply to insurance companies have meant that they have a minimum tax level of at least 30% of their gross premium, okay, as taxable income. That has been taken off by this regulation, okay? So there's no limit in terms of how much the tax law will assume their profit to be, which is 30% of gross premium. There's also, over the years as well, there's also a limit to the amount of expenses they can charge to their P&L. I'm talking about insurance companies. Now, these two provisions have always made investment in insurance companies unattractive. And so you don't have a lot of money flowing into insurance. And this regulation coming at this time that the industry is going through recapitalization is very, very encouraging in terms of investors coming in. And that what it means that the tax liabilities of insurance companies are going to be down to a large extent. The VAT as well, there's full clarification today as to what VAT is applicable to or not applicable to. For instance, most basic food items, VAT is not applicable to them, medicine, educational books, fees, and all that. As one of my friends said, look, if you live like a villager, you may actually be completely insulated from VAT. Okay, so the VAT is applicable to certain kind of goods. And by moving it from...
luxury goods, luxury items?
I won't say luxury items. I'll probably say on the items used by the middle class.
Okay.
Probably.
Because when you said if you live like a villager.
Yeah, because the basic food items are not covered by VAT. Okay, and you pay your school fee, you go for medical services, not covered by VAT. Okay, so then the VAT rate, and then people talk about 7.5%. Let's not forget that some years back, VAT was actually taken to 10%. But because the public outcry came down to 7%, most advisors were spending about 10%. And again, you see...
But how much would government gain from that increase in VAT, considering that the states take the bulk of it?
Yeah, but you see, it's all part of the public good. You need to talk about expectation in terms of what government, how they take care of the public after paying the taxes. To be honest, both of us will understand the part of the revenue that go to the federal and the part that go to the state. But for the average person, all they want is that the government doing something for them, whether it's the state government, whether it's the federal government. But that will come to reinforce the comfort in terms of government responsiveness to their needs based on the taxes that are paying. Okay. Now, that big hit also for the government and also for the taxpayer clarity is on how would I say the new economy, which is digital economy. Okay. Previously it's been difficult to determine how to tax them, particularly for non-resident companies. These are companies outside the shores of the country who are selling services into Nigeria for which Nigerians are buying. Okay, and these are both goods and also services. By our tax laws, they are shielded because they believe that they don't have a local presence in Nigeria, and as such, they are not required to file returns in Nigeria or to pay tax in Nigeria. And you will know that that's becoming a significant part of commerce today, and means that government is losing revenue in terms of taxation for goods and services. That has been brought into the bracket. Clearly today, if a company deriving income from Nigeria and that the Minister of Finance had been given a latitude to establish whether that company had a significant economic presence in the country, then we expect them to pay taxes in Nigeria. And that's a very, very good clarification for the taxpayers, because it'll be hazy. And also for government, it's a very major source of revenue. So, and those are two major sources for government through this whole process of the finance bill, digital economic taxation, and also the VAT increase that gone to 7.5.
But speaking about that, how will it actually work? As different countries also have different VAT rates. And then Nigerians that are receiving services from NRCs as well, they're going to have to sort of remit on those VAT rates. So doesn't that also kind of put the Nigerian at harm? Doesn't that kind of affect the ease of doing business? Because I think there's some confusion around how that policy is really going to work with the NRCs.
No, I think the first thing is they brought into a tax bracket. The hardware tax is a different conversation altogether in terms of how that process will be administered. I think the first thing today is their liable to taxation. Whether they will expect them to come to the country and file returns in terms of their P&L is a different kettle of fish entirely. It's possible that they may just ask them to pay withholding taxes, and those withholding taxes may be the final tax liability on their revenue out of Nigeria, which may actually be the way to go, because to establish that profitability from Nigeria is going to be a difficult situation because they have a global P&L, okay? And so the regulation, when it actually comes out on the back of the finance bill when it's passed, will determine how that will happen. Now, remember, I didn't talk about whether it's the VAT, or whether it's a CIT, or whether it's actually just a withholding tax on the income count of Nigeria. What has happened is that they come within the tax bracket. It's now left for the tax authority to determine how they're going to be taxed. Yeah. It's definitely not going to affect the ease of doing business as such, because, like we say, the new economy. I mean, Black Friday, a lot of Nigerians are buying stuff over the net, you know, and they're being delivered into the country. And these are entities outside the country today who are making money out of Nigeria, but most of those monies are not taxed there. And globally, also, it's an issue for different countries, and different countries respond. I believe that part of the objective which is stated by the government is to align domestic law to global best practice, and this is an emerging economy.
We need to take a short break. Okay. When we return, I would like you to comment on other sectors of the economy and the implications of this bill for those sectors. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. Still with us in the studio in Lagos is Emeka Onwuka, partner and head of private clients and family wealth at Andersen Tax LP. Well, in the course of the discussion, you've talked at length about VAT, about the implications of the finance bill for the insurance industry and also for the digital economy, which is an emerging area of business in Nigeria. Now, I mean, your original background was in banking. You were MD CEO of Diamond Bank. Are there implications for the banking sector and also for the capital market?
Let me take the capital market first. There are certain type of transactions that you do in the capital market today that you run the risk of double taxation on such transactions, okay? And also run the risk that investors in those assets are taxed in a manner that we don't want to encourage them to continue to invest. The first one has to do with real estate investment companies. These are SPVs that the SEC allowed to pool resources from investors to make investments in real estate assets. Now, under the existing tax laws, because it's a company, it is expected to file returns with the corporate affairs, with the FIRS, and pay tax at 30% on the earnings of that fund. Then when it distributes the dividend out of that fund as well, they also pay withholding taxes on those dividends. You will now see that for an investor, they have suffered 30% corporate tax, they have suffered 10% 10% withholding tax on dividend. Before that investor, whether it's a company individual, go to file his or her own or the corporate tax returns as well. That has been a major disincentive to participate in those real estate companies. This regulation has removed that. Today, the real estate investment companies have recognized by the finance bill as a pass-through entity. So they don't have to pay the corporate taxation, the corporate tax of 30%. And as long as they distribute their dividend, at least 75% of dividend within 12 months, within 9 months, tax not apply to that. That's a very major incentive to allow people to make such investment. The other set of transactions has to do what I call reversible transactions, whether you are trading equities or whether you are doing debt. Where you do a repurchase transaction, you are actually lending your asset to a counterparty for a period of time, and you return the asset back. This is just in simple language, the description of those transactions. Today, CGT, capital gains tax, and VAT may apply to those transactions because you're actually making a sale, even though you're buying back the asset. But this finance bill has actually now recognized that those transactions are actually transactions that are reversible. To that extent, they are not exempted from both VAT and also exempted from CGT. And that's a very major encouragement for those transactions to hold. And those transactions are transactions that, I would say, make this financial market more sophisticated and allow people to do transactions that over time will encourage the size and volume of financial transactions in the market. So that's a very major step in that direction. Then for the banks as well, the current exemption of financial assets, that bonds and treasury bills, the interest on them from taxes, at least are maintained by the finance bill, so they don't run a risk. But we don't know when that will happen because the current concession will expire in about 2 or 3 years time. They clarified stamp duties on financial transactions, which the banks put up 50 naira. The tax authority put 50 naira per transaction, but now that 50 naira would apply to transactions above 10,000 naira. So also leaving the small customers out of the tax bracket in terms of stamp duties. I've got clarification today about stamp duty applying to both electronic and actual physical transactions that we are putting stamp on transactions. Those kind of regulation has actually improved the ease with which the customers will do business with the bank and ultimately will be beneficial to the banks as well. Yeah.
Very true. Now, what would you say the reaction has been so far to the legislature on the finance bill? Have there been any modifications, let's say, that have been submitted by the executive arm of government? And if so, what was proposed?
Okay, I'll say that, there was a public hearing. Okay, I think the first we'll look at what the public reaction is. Yes. Everybody is hanging on to VAT.
And stamp duties.
Qualified. But I would say on that, people are worried about the rate. However, the government are also giving the sweetener in terms of excluding small companies from VAT, which is also good because on one side, they increase the rate. On the other side, they're taking the small businesses, which probably the SME that actually form the bulk of business in the country where employment exists and also where people buy their goods and services are actually exempted for VAT. So to that extent, I believe that we'll ultimately accept the 7.5%. And I'll come and talk about issues about the level of taxation in Nigeria, level of tax collection, what this VAT rate is, and what the prospect of taking the VAT rate up from 7.5 over time. Now, there was a public hearing, both at the Senate and at the House of Reps. And overall, like I said, for most advisors, it's a welcome development because nothing here came as a surprise, okay? But there were issues, particularly on the petroleum profit tax, the withholding taxes that now apply on the dividend out of the upstream companies, okay? I know that at the public hearing, there were significant discussions around that. And I talked about some of the provision generally, but in terms of the nuances, the detail, there were some discussions around that at the public hearing. But ultimately, it had gone through Senate as presented with just very minor adjustment. The House of Reps also, there were some discussions around some issues, but largely for most practitioners, in terms of advisors that have seen where the existing laws are and what the finance bill are trying to do, after all the conversations, ultimately, the bill is going to be passed as presented with just very minor adjustment.
Well, I mean, it's good you mentioned the players in the oil and gas sector who have always complained that our tax regime is not competitive. and that look, it could create, what is being proposed could create fresh challenges and, hot, competitiveness. Do you see that risk, or you think they are just crying wolf?
Well, you know how it is. When you're asked to pay more, the first reaction is that I don't want to pay more. It's natural. It's natural. But let's look at what the bill sought to achieve. Currently, if you earn dividend in any company, you pay a withholding tax on it. And withholding tax, the withholding tax for dividend today is the final tax liability. Okay. Now, for the oil company, because the petroleum profit tax rates are usually very high, it ranges between 50 to 65%, depending on the nature of your contract, whether it's a production sharing contract, whether it's a joint venture contract structure you have with the federal government. They say, oh, we already paid enough, but then we don't want to pay a lot. We don't want to pay any more on the dividend. But we are talking about probably the withholding tax on dividend probably be about 10%, 5-10%, on dividend. So the corporates are not exposed to this. Only the investors and ultimately those who are making investment in oil and gas. But again, the fact of the matter is that they also have to look at not just dividend, but look at the policy regime around investment in oil and gas. And of course, the government has said they're going to come with at least 2 executive bills to reform the petroleum industry. Let's wait and see. Then we can put everything on balance and know whether there's a basis for the snap complaint on the withholding tax on dividend.
Surely. Now, one of the main objectives of this bill as well is to ensure that our tax practices align with global best practices. How would you say it compares?
I think very well. I just talked about the non-resident companies, which is a big issue across the world. For most of the digital companies that are participating in the new digital economy, and countries are trying to see how they can deal with that. And Nigeria has gone ahead in terms of that alignment. Also, I talked about insurance business also in terms of the new tax regime. This is in alignment with global best practice. There are other areas we didn't talk about in terms of approvals required for management fees, for royalties, that previously you have to go to NOTA to get approval because the law requires the minister to sign up on that. That has been taken off. And as long as you can comply with the transfer pricing rules, you may not need to go to anybody to sign anything off for you for those kind of expenses to be accepted. What transfer pricing rules? What transfer pricing rules in tax is when you have transactions between related parties, the tax authorities want to make sure that they're done at arm's length and not that you give concessionary basis for such transactions that will ultimately deprive them of a taxable profit. So today, as long as clearly those transactions are done with third parties or related parties at arm's length, and you can actually claim those, and this is what's expected globally. So you see that the level of approvals and level of documentation required under the current regime has certainly been reduced. And that is what you expect.
Well, we need to take another short commercial break, but you've spoken positively about this bill. I'd like to know whether you think there are still some gaps in the bill as proposed that will still need to be addressed, in your own view as a professional. We'll be right back. It's still the morning show, and we still have with us Emeka Onwuka of Andersen Tax LP. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us in our Lagos studio is Emeka Onwuka, partner and head of private clients and family wealth at Andersen Tax LP. And all morning he's been helping us to take a look at the finance bill as proposed by the federal government of Nigeria. Now, before we went on break, I said, well, you've spoken, in support of the finance bill, all the incentives, all the advantages, the implications from one sector or the other. But I was wondering whether you think that there are certain things that can be done to still improve upon the bill before it finally becomes law. And to also address the fears of the average Nigerian. What the average Nigerian gets is that, government just wants money, and the only way they want money is to just tax us. I mean, many Nigerians, for example, have stopped using the POS because, you know, when you pay with the POS, there's another tax of 50 naira. And Nigerians say, well, on one hand, the CBN is talking about financial inclusion. And then you have to ask us to pay more. And 50 naira is a lot to a lot of people. If you have to pay it 5-6 times a day, then that would be a serious, hole in the pocket.
Well, you're right in terms of 50 naira being significant, but that's what the bill has also addressed. The threshold now is 10,000 naira transaction above. So for 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, you're not going to pay those 50 naira you're paying currently. Then when we talk about the average Nigerian complaining about taxation, I think there are also some explanation as to what happened in the past, how we got to where we are, why taxes are not popular and all that, and the fact that government over the years have funded the public expenditure, from proceeds of oil. That's not how it's supposed to be. Okay. Today, the tax collections to expenditure of government is about 20%. No, that's not what it's supposed to be. Nigeria had the lowest tax to GDP rate in Africa at about 5.7%. The average for the top 26 countries in Africa is about 17.8%, with Ghana at 15%, with South Africa at about 24%. The OECD countries are doing about 34%. The populace need to make payment for the services they expect the government to provide. And also, the issue about accountability, almost like a chicken and egg situation. I say, people are not willing to pay because the government had not accounted for the level of tax they are collecting. But the truth of the matter, that people are not holding government accountable because government is funding most public expenditure from oil revenue, which they believe is not coming from their pocket. Now, the more people feel that are paying for government expenditure, and they will be able to see whether government is spending those monies wisely or not. They will be more interested, even in governance, to make sure that the governance level is to the extent that they will have benefit for the taxes that they're paying. Okay. So, granted, where we're coming from, we need to progress from where we're coming from, to a level. That's why the government is talking about 15% tax to GDP ratio under this new finance bill, and also the measure they are going to get over the years. However, the only thing I would say that in this whole process, we've seen the finance bill trying to shield the poor and shield the average, I won't say the average Nigerian, the small businesses from heavy taxation. They're out of taxation, even up to 100 million, you're only paying 20%. That the implementation of the bill needs to be done in such a manner you will achieve the objectives of the bill of fiscal equity. And also we'll talk about the alignment. The issue is that until the execution, you see the execution, that's when you know whether it's achieved the objectives or not. But we'll back the government because where we're coming from, we still have a long way to go in terms of increasing the level of taxes being paid. For instance, in Lagos, I was listening to a presentation. Lagos is leading in terms of IGR collections. In the whole country, they're doing almost 40 billion naira IGR. But the average tax paid by Lagosian today is about 30,000 naira. And that is quite low. The tax rate today in Nigeria for personal income tax, the maximum tax rate, the bracket is about 24%. And if you apply the considered relief for 20%, the effective tax rate on personal income taxes today is about 19%. The UK is doing over 40%, and most of OECD countries are over 40%. And as a matter of fact, I was telling some of my younger colleagues that when we started this practice, in the late 80s, early 90s, personal income tax rate of 55% here in this country. But today, it's as like I say, it's effectively about 19%. So I believe that over the years, the tax laws have been done in a manner to encourage people to comply. And that's why the tax rate today, corporate tax of 30%. Some years back, it was 45%. Came down to 40, came down to 30. Now, 20% for companies under 100 million and 0 for companies under 25 million. So I believe that they're giving enough incentive for people to willingly comply to the tax regime. And in that whole process, we can move from where we are today to what's expected in terms of taxation funding public expenditure.
Thank you for breaking that down in a very extensive manner, because I think public opinion about this was not that we're not being taxed enough, because I don't think we can argue about that. At the end of the day, we aren't necessarily being taxed enough, but that we need to increase the tax base. And it's more about the government going after ensuring that people are paying more taxes and not looking for more ways to tax the people that are already paying taxes. But this was very well broken down. Now, some analysts are also of the opinion that Nigeria should pause further borrowings, or the government should pause further borrowings until we have managed to increase revenue. Because if we look at our debt service to revenue percentage, that was at 54%. In 2018, although our debt to GDP ratio has been about 30%. So these figures make it quite complex. What is your take on this? What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, you see, the first response when we talk about debt is that people say, oh, they're adverse to taking debt, okay, believing that in simple, it's very simple meaning, you are borrowing, you are spending what you don't have, okay, and then you wonder in terms of whether the debt can be paid or how it will affect activity. But that, fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with debt. Okay. Now, in terms of what had happened in the past few years, the government, about four years ago, set an objective to move from local to international debt for several reasons. One, in terms of pricing, also in terms of accretion to reserves. And that had helped them during the time of the major dip in oil supply and oil prices, and also deep in production locally because of issues we have around the country. That had helped them to sustain the foreign reserves. Okay, I'm aware of the last bill that the request that had gone to National Assembly. We don't have the details because normally when you want to do a debt program, you go for an approval of an amount. Okay, then you come back. You then look at the details of your program. Are you doing a refinancing? We don't know. It's possible there are some maturities that they want to refinance offshore. It's also possible that there are some local debt they want to translate to foreign debt to increase accretion to reserve. It's also possible that some of the money are going to be tied to a particular project. Now, I'm assuming that this request that I've gone with, I don't have the privilege of seeing what went to National Assembly. That has to do with foreign debt. Most of the financial advisors that are going to run that process, the book builders, are going to ask questions as to what you did with the last money that you have. You've collected from us, and what are going with the new one. And to be honest, those questions are very, very hard questions. And you don't just set it out. When you set it out, the government official managing finances, from the Federal Minister, from the Minister of Finance to the CBN governor, will go on a roadshow, out there to convince the investors and say, look at what we've done with the ones we've taken, look at what we're going to do with the new debt we are going to take. And that will also determine the pricing on the debt as well. So I will say we are borrowing in terms of the level of borrowing. When the pricing of your debt start going out of sync, you now know that significant discomfort in terms of what level of debt you are taking. Then again, if you have things to do today, the economy is growing at 2%, about average of 2% GDP. If the debt can take us to a significant growth of about 4 to 5%, why not? So in principle, there's nothing wrong with it. But the issue is that utilization and what you plan to do, what you plan to do with the new money that you are going to raise. Nobody is happy at this level of growth because this is right behind population growth. And so in actual fact, you're achieving almost like a negative over time. Your per capita income is going down with this level of... so whatever the government is doing, they should do, and part of it is having to increase their borrowing to energize and to fuel economic activities and see whether I can have a higher GDP growth. So as we had the details, I will not jump to any conclusion as to, I don't have an opinion until I see more details on that. But the issue is that what are you going to use the money? Is it going to generate economic activity? By how much are you going to drive a GDP? And of course, when the low GDP growth, the taxation, the collections also appear lower. So also chicken and egg situation that if there's an uptake in terms of economic activity, okay, that will help the collection. People will pay more taxes, and we can then reduce borrowing over time. And if you also look at the budget in terms of the capital expenditure budget, very good this year, about almost 30%. There are years that we couldn't even do 10% in terms of capital expenditure. And most of the funds are used for the current expenditure and also for debt service. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've said a lot about widening the tax base, increasing government revenue, but you raised an issue about implementation of the finance bill, that if it's implemented in a way that does not align with the stated objectives, then there could be issues. What are the likely challenges that you see with regard to tax collection, tax administration in Nigeria? Not necessarily with the trust deficit on the side of the people, but in terms of the actual process and the structure that we have. There are some people, for example, who have recommended that, look, the Customs and Excise Agency should be merged with the FIRS so that we just have, one central unit, and that could make tax collection more efficient. But what are the challenges that you foresee?
I think over the years, there have been poor visibility in terms of economic activities and economic players. But I can tell you that in the past 2 or 3 years, the data available to revenue is significantly higher than what they had about 5 years ago. For instance, the BVN. The revenue is able to see all your transactions in the banking industry. And that is a very major step. Okay. Now, apart from that also, that a lot of financial transactions today are being done electronically. And that's open to the revenue. So there are significant data available to revenue today to be able to go in and bring more and more people into the tax bracket. There are issues some months ago about blocking accounts of customers in banks. It's all because of the fraud that they have. So I believe that administration, implementation will be a lot easier because of the data that we have, because also the digital economy in terms of information. What it then left is that there should be proper coordination from FIRS to the Internal Revenue Service of the state through the Joint Tax Board. So what you see is that the FIRS, they've done a lot over the past few years. Like I said, in terms of information that they have, what they need is to map the information to individuals and entities, because a lot of companies are not even filing returns in the first place. They're not even in terms of the annual returns to the Corporate Affairs Commission as activities of the company are not even being filed. Not talking about going to the FRA to file their taxes. So the FRA is doing their bit. Now, the different internal revenue bodies across the states have different level of, in terms of quality, and the quality and the capacity differs. But the Joint Tax Board is the entity that helps to harmonize the effectiveness of it. So the FRA with the Joint Tax Board, we need to ensure that all the states are almost at par in terms of the quality of administration and ensuring that the finance bill is implemented as intended. Otherwise, if it's not implemented as intended, you may still have situations where there are a lot of discretionary levies and interpretation and also application, and that will not support the acceptance of the finance bill as a bill that has improved the tax of the tax laws ultimately.
We are about to take a very quick commercial break, and then we'll come back to you on this discussion. And when we do, I'd like to bring you up on further objectives that we may not have discussed that the finance bill is laying out for us. Do stay with us. You're still watching The Morning Show here on Arise News. Welcome back to The Morning Show here on Arise News. Emeka Onwuka, partner and head of private clients and family wealth at Andersen Tax LP, is still in the studio with us discussing matters regarding the finance bill that has now been passed. So I was asking you about other key objectives that the finance bill is proposing or poses that we may not have discussed so far.
Okay, there are bits and pieces. Let's see if we look at on the corporate income taxation. There has been concerns about companies that are filing returns in the early years of the operation. Okay. Usually, you pay taxes based on prior year activities. You will now recognize that for a company that just started operations, that what is prior year activity for them. So we used to have what they call a commencement rule. That commencement rule prescribed how companies are taxed within the first 3 years. Now, because of this issue of prior year taxation of prior year activities, you find that ultimately, based on existing regulation, on the existing tax regime, you may have to pay tax twice on one of the years during the early years of commencement. And also, at the point of cessation of a business as well, Remember also I said stop a prior year, and you have to stop operating in a particular year. So both the commencement and the cessation rules have been affected by the new regulation to save companies from that issue about double taxation one of those years. So that's one area we believe that has helped in that regard, in terms of outlook, for new businesses. There's also an area of thin capitalization rule, which you didn't have in this country previously. What thin capitalization rule tend to limit the interest you pay on loans that the company takes. Currently, we just introduced one, particularly for foreign loans. So companies that have taken foreign loans, they cannot charge interest on those foreign loan beyond 30% of their earnings before taxes, interest, and depreciation. That had not been there before, and currently also that they can carry over those interest, but not beyond 5 years. This clarification had just been done under the finance bill as well. There's also another issue around what we call excess dividend taxation, which had discouraged companies from locating their headquarters in the country. What is that? Currently, if a company has interest in another company and earn dividend from the company where it's invested in, when that company wants to pay its own taxation, talk about the company sitting under the holding company, the revenue will examine its income, its earnings from its operation vis-a-vis the dividends they want to pay. And if they believe that dividends are higher than the income that they have earned for the operation, they will start that dividend again. They assume that dividend that they're paying is their income available for taxation. And that discourages the company from having the holding company structure in the country. But that has been eliminated. That once an income coming out of a subsidiary enters the holding company, it's no longer subject to taxation when you are going to pay those dividends. There's also another issue around payment of dividend from retained earnings. Same thing. Companies pay taxes before they get to the point of distribution or to retain earnings. What then happens is that by the Companies Act, you can pay dividend out of retained earnings. But what you find in the current tax regime is that any time a company wants to pay dividend out of retained earnings, the revenue will take a look and check what they declare for income for that year and look at dividend they're trying to pay. If they believe that dividend they're paying is more than the income they've assessed to tax, they will tax that dividend again. That's double tax because the company has actually paid taxes on those incomes and before they return them. So at the point of not distributing subsequent years, they ought not to pay. That's although protected by new finance bill. Currently, you can make those payments without having those taxes levied on those retained earnings dividends. So bits and pieces in those ways. That's why I'm saying that some of these issues have been issues that we're arguing with revenue over time, but a lot of clients have come into it, and the companies are now in a better position to carry on their business. This extra dividend tax has been a very major issue. Then there are issues around VAT and CGT, that's what they call the capital gain tax, on asset transfers within a group when they're doing a restructure. Today, there are no exemption. Once you're moving assets around, whether you're a related party or not, you have to pay VAT, you have to pay corporate, what they call the capital gain tax on them. But under the new finance bill, as long as you are moving assets for purposes of reorganization in the business, both CGT and VAT will not apply. As long as those assets are not sold within 9 months, okay, after the reorganization or acquired within 9 months before the reorganization. So these are further details that are covered by finance bill, which we believe will enhance ease of doing business and allow further investment and for companies to have more transparency and be willing to pay their taxes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, all of this is fine and very educative. But I would like to draw your attention to the Vanguard newspaper this morning. Okay. The story here seems to paint a very different picture from what we've been saying. Okay. The story is titled, Private Sector Rejects Finance Bill 2019, Petitions Buhari. Okay. says it will kill business, worsen poverty level if signed into law, tasks federal government to widen tax net, including non-paying groups and persons. And, you know, it's quite a lengthy story. The organized private sector is kicking. They say they object to the law. The bill, the increase in VAT, they say would erode the purchasing power of persons. They complain about increase in penalties. They also say that the bill does not address issues on allowable input tax. That's Section 17 of the bill as proposed. Then also the Association of Small Business Owners of Nigeria, they are also saying, for us in small businesses, the timing for any form of tax increase through the passage of finance bill is wholly ill-timed and masses unfriendly. You know, so many complaints, even about the Companies Income Tax Act. So do you think these persons are just overreacting?
To be honest, I think a little bit of overreaction, but people are entitled to their views. I cannot say my own view is superior to their own views, but I always want to deal with facts. Did the finance bill increase the corporate income tax rate? No. Did the finance bill reduce the corporate income tax rate for certain companies? Yes. Did the finance bill consider the small businesses in the new regulations? Yes. The only thing people are hanging on to is VAT. I keep saying, what is the level of VAT paid in other countries versus what we are paying in the country today? What is the level of collection? On the average in Africa, about 51% of taxation revenue comes from tax of goods and services. Whereas, in fact, Nigeria is also not even on that. Nigeria gets more money for taxation of income and profit. That's not what it's supposed to be. It should be more of taxation of goods and services, because in the European countries, indirect taxes, which is the tax of goods and services, are more effective. And it's pay as you consume, supposedly, because if you don't buy the item, you don't pay the VAT. Like I said earlier, I say if you live like a villager, you know, you are completely insulated from VAT. So if you are consuming goods that VAT are applied to, then you suffer that. But again, for the manufacturing company that impute and output VAT, as a matter of fact, they ought not to suffer the VAT, because the VAT you pay on your input, you recover from your sales, and you only pay to government the net. Actually, the consumers will have to complain about VAT. Like we said also when we talk about the 7.5%, and let us see how it's going to be implemented. Okay. Probably my suggestion will have been that we may look at particular items and actually take their VAT beyond 7.5% and probably leave some at 5%. But it is what it is, really. Most of the expectation on my development partners, and also given what's happening in other countries, the VAT ought to be about 10%. The issue is that on what items are they going to be applied to? I think we should give a chance to the bill, and let us see how it will impact the economy. But something that I have not said, and we also have to take note of, this is the first time that the executive is submitting a finance bill alongside with the budget. And that shows you that they are thinking the tax regime is an issue for them, and they thought about it very deeply before they submitted this bill. And that's also a signaling of the dynamism of the tax regime. What it means is that if we implement the finance bill over the next 12 months and it does not achieve the expected impact, and is leading to some reactions that is not what anticipated in terms of the objective, we'll tweak it again, maybe over the next 12 months. But I think for now that there is nothing really punitive, apart from the VAT, which I said not punitive, but I think it's in line with expectation.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. But before we go, maybe we take you back, down memory lane. You were MD CEO of Diamond Bank, and I think it was, under your watch that the process of, merger with Access Bank began, right? It wasn't under your watch. You had left then.
Yeah, long time.
Okay, but you're a major player within the banking sector. What's your assessment of that process?
No, to be honest, it's not
without necessarily asking you to be critical of an institution you once presided over.
People, for some reason, still have serving with Diamond Bank. I left Diamond Bank in 2011. That's how many years? That's about almost 8 years ago. Okay.
And it was a tier 2 bank then, wasn't it leading, actually?
Yeah, well, tier 2 bank, yeah. There were 2 banks, exactly. And there have been 2 CEOs after me. And I think 7 to 8 years is a long time for me not to be honestly, not to have the details as to the operations of the institution and as to what has the transaction they've undertaken. I don't have the full. The only information available to me is the information available to you as any other person in the market. But Diamond Bank remains is a fantastic brand, is a fantastic institution. The bank, one of the strongest back offices in this country. The bank that carved a niche as the dominant SME player in this market and also the fastest growing retail bank in the industry. And I believe that is why the franchise was attractive to Access Bank. Access Bank, which largely has been a corporate institution, and I think the merger with Diamond Bank and Access Bank will strengthen the new institution and also for the benefit of the general banking public.
Thank you very much.